Well, reduced to the simplest, in the long term, the United Kingdom would become more closed. It would be less open to trade than it is now. There's really no alternative to our current membership, which makes any sense, which gives us any real degree of sovereignty, which won't involve a reduction in our openness, because our openness to Europe, which is far and away our biggest market, takes almost half our trade, will be smaller. With less trade, there's lots of evidence that there will be less productive efficiency, we will be less productive, our economy will be smaller. The recent estimates by the Treasury discuss 3 possible scenarios, and they all indicate significant reduction in output. And beyond that, we have the problem of the transition. Nobody knows what our position will be after we make the Brexit vote. We don't know what we will be wanting. We don't even know the government. We don't know how our partners in the EU will respond. I think they could be very brutal, and that will create massive uncertainty and costs for our economy, and that will affect not just the trade, but also investment in the country. We are the biggest recipient of foreign direct investment in the EU. Many people come here because they want access to the EU market. Presumably that will be cut off. So that transitional process will also be very costly. The EU, from an economic point of view, it is our largest market. It's not growing so dynamically. Of course, there are other markets that are growing more, but the base is huge. That means that the increment, the actual absolute increase in the size of the market potentially there remains very, very important for us. It's our home base. For a lot of our producers and firms, it's really where we start. You think about our car industry, aerospace, the service sector. Without it, we'd be a small offshore island, a completely different economy from the one we are today. It's really quite clear, first, that we are a relatively deregulated economy, despite our membership of the EU. It doesn't seem to be such a problem. The OECD, of which all the developed countries are members, shows us as very unregulated in terms of product markets and pretty unregulated in terms of labor market. And on the latter, we can see that very clearly from the extraordinarily strong employment performance since the crisis. It shows that our labor market is operating very well. And beyond that, if we actually look really objectively at our economy, we can see the biggest regulations, the costliest regulations we have are those on land use planning, which affects our housing supply. It has nothing to do with the EU at all. Recently, the government decided, very bold step, to raise the minimum wage massively, had nothing to do with the EU. The idea that we are overwhelmingly burdened by EU regulation and that we just desperately need to get and want to get out of it is just false. Well, first of all, I think they are genuinely worried for Britain. They think it will be very damaging to Britain. But of course, they have their own interests at stake. For the US, which is the most important partner by far, the Britain's membership in the EU is not just about economics, though Europe is America's most important economic partner. It wants a healthy, vital Europe, but it sees Britain as a close ally, sharing values. It wants Britain to make Europe more Atlanticist, more open. It wants Europe itself to be strong and robust, able to defend itself and look after itself. This has been a strategic objective of the US really since the Second World War, and Britain remains one of the 2 most significant military powers in Europe. So if you take all these things together, what the US fears is that the West will be immensely weakened by a British departure. Europe will be weaker, and Britain will be weaker, and therefore the US will be weaker. By the way, many European countries, they recognize we're never going to join the euro, but other members also want Britain in because they see Britain as an important European country, able to strengthen Europe. And then other friends, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, see Britain's voice in Europe, a very important part of the West and the world, as very valuable from their point of view. So all of them, I think pretty consistently, all the elites anyway, the people who understand this, want Britain to remain apart and to remain an influential player in the European scene. From their point of view, that is in their interests.